Welcome to the 31st Historic Calgary Week. My name is Doug Coates, and I would like to thank you for joining us for Reinach Avenue, Calgary's Forgotten Jewish Street, presented by Harry Sanders. Tonight's talk is presented in partnership with the Jewish Historical Society of Southern Alberta. It's my pleasure to call upon the president of the Society, Sandra Lipton, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Doug. And on behalf of the Jewish Historical Society of Southern Alberta, I would like to express our appreciation to Chinook Country Historical Society's Historic Calgary Week Committee and the Calgary Public Library for partnering with us in the presentation of tonight's program. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce Harry the Historian. Harry Sanders has been an historian almost since birth. Born in Drumheller and raised in Calgary, it is his passion to collect and share the fascinating stories of life in Calgary and Alberta. Harry not only preserves and promotes history as a living as a freelance historical consultant, but has also served as an active volunteer for various historical societies. Currently, Harry is a board member of the Jewish Historical Society of Southern Alberta and co-editor of the Historical Society of Alberta's journal, Alberta History. Harry has published in several magazines and is the author of 10 works on local history. In 2012, he was appointed as the first historian laureate for the Calgary Heritage Authority. A popular public speaker with fascinating stories, I am sure you will find his presentation tonight most enjoyable and informative.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And thank you, Doug, and thank you, Catherine, and to every organization involved, the Public Library, Chinook Country, Historic Calgary Week, the Jewish Historical Society of Southern Alberta, and to everyone who helped me to put together tonight's presentation, particularly Roberta Kerr, the archivist of the Jewish Historical Society of Southern Alberta, who responded to many requests I had and provided many of the illustrations I'm going to have, as well as just individuals, people whose families lived on 4th Avenue East who responded to my requests and provided photographs and stories. It's just been wonderful. A couple of things I wanted to mention. I'll speak, I guess, until about 8 o'clock and then leave 30 minutes for questions. I haven't gone through this talk. I've been putting it together. It's turned out to be a much bigger project than I had anticipated. So I think tonight's participants are going to be guinea pigs for an even better iteration of this talk in the future. And a lot of in some cases, I've gone through Henderson's directories and tax rolls and things like that to establish residency, who lived where, who owned what. It's really a work in progress. And in some cases, you'll have interesting stories, and in others, just names, people who have identifiable Jewish names, so we know where Jews lived or worked at a certain time, but not much more than names, I'm afraid. Then another thing I wanted to mention is the selection of 4th Avenue Southeast as the area of study for Jewish life in Calgary. I'm not presenting this isn't an analytical approach. I haven't done any statistical analysis of the distribution of Jewish dwellings and places of work over a particular period of time. I chose this street because coincidentally, before I think any Jews ever lived there or worked there, it had been named for a Jewish person, Baron Jacques Adolphe de Reinach. Once again, we're not even sure how he pronounced its name. It's our best understanding. It's Reinach. He was a German Jew who became a banker and then moved to France, became a French national and a baron, changed his name to be more francophone, and was an investor in the Canadian Pacific Railway. So he never set foot here. He was never on Reinach Avenue, but as so many of us who enjoy learning about Calgary's history know, the streets and avenues in downtown Calgary, when the town site was first laid out in 1884, were named for officers of the Canadian Pacific Railway or its real estate subsidiary, the Canada Northwest Land Company. So that's why we have Stephen Avenue, named for George Stephen, or Baron Mount Stephen. And so many of the old names or dual names that always reference these people: McTavish, Macintosh, so many Scottish names in downtown Calgary. But Reinach was the one for 4th Avenue, named for Baron Jacques de Reinach, who was an investor in the Canadian Pacific Railway and on the board of directors, but he never set foot in Calgary, to my understanding. Jacques de Reinach, he it's a point of pride, I must say, to know that there's a street in Calgary that was named for a Jewish person, and a prominent one. But he's a little bit problematic as a point of pride. For one thing, his endeavor in Canada, investing in and helping to guide the Canadian Pacific Railway, many regarded it as a nation building exercise at the time, and the nation to which we belong was founded on this in many ways on this transcontinental railway that was constructed. Of course, now we look back and we recognize it to be the instrument of colonization that we know it to have been. The other thing is that Jacques de Reinach was involved centrally in a bribery scandal in the early 1890s. There had been a French effort to build the Panama Canal. This is a couple of decades before a decade before the Americans built the Panama Canal. There was a French interest in it, and this involved many government figures, and Baron Jacques de Reinach was a central figure as a banker, and he committed suicide over this. So that's the fate of Jacques de Reinach, and he's fictionalized in a couple of works of fiction, one of them by Émile Zola, under a different name, not Reinach. And then in 1904, the city council changed all the street names to avenue names to avenue numbers. So that was the end of Reinach Avenue. And that is, as far as I know, before any Jews moved into the area. Here we have Baron Jacques de Reinach. And the street that was named for him, although the photograph I think was taken probably after the street name was changed, and I don't know the exact location in which this photograph was taken. I suspect it's aiming west. Now, what I've done here is I've just sort of arranged things block by block, and we're going to look at a 6-block area from about 4th Street Southeast to about 2nd Street Southwest, both sides of the streets. And under this title block, I have indicated which city neighborhood it's in, whether it's downtown East Village or Chinatown or the downtown commercial core, because we're going to be talking about each of them. So here we're coming into downtown over the former Langevin Bridge, the Reconciliation Bridge. So what you see to the right is what everyone knows to be Booker's Crab Shack, and you're heading into the downtown core. That's the start of our tour. Here we have the pre-First World War fire insurance map showing that block, and the one structure that we see, although I think there were others as well, is the Calgary Public Market. Now, so many of us, and this is the post-Second World War fire insurance plan that's less colorful and less interesting to look at. Now, so many of you have seen a photograph or multiple photographs of the Calgary Public Market, such as it was. It was just north of where the Cecil Hotel was until recently. It was built in 1913 and it stood there until 1954. And so many of us thought it was just simply gone until just a few years ago when Chris Edwards, a well-known figure in Calgary heritage, did a comparative study using aerial photographs and measured all the dimensions and looked at other photographs, elevation photographs, and placement of windows, and concluded that the Calgary Public Market that you see in this photograph its remnant is in the Booker's Crab Shack, which is now the former Booker Crab Shack. Anyway, here we have it, the Calgary Public Market, a much nicer photograph of it that I got from the City of Calgary Corporate Records archives this week. And I'm getting to the Jewish connection. Here we have Annie Gale, a city councillor, the first female city councillor in Calgary and the second in the British Empire. She was a social reformer, and she persuaded city council, even before she was elected to it, to make that market into a city utility to help to bring down food prices for the needy by selling food, the city selling food itself at the Calgary Public Market. But ultimately, it became privately owned, and it was a Jewish person, Sam Shainin, who was a vendor in that market who ended up opening the building, and he owned it at the time of its demise, which you'll see. Here we're looking at the east side of the building, and this is the same view that you see coming into downtown. So you're looking at that very same building. This is the fate of the building. It burned down right around Christmas 1954. And here's another City of Calgary Corporate Records Archives photograph showing the burnt out hulk of the building and the prominent sign of the owner, Sam Shainin, right over the entrance. So then the top level is cut off and the building is converted into what we know now as the former Booker's Crab Shack, kind of a landmark building in the east end of downtown. The form is also familiar because it inspired the design of Gasoline Alley at Heritage Park. This isn't my photograph. I gleaned this from the internet, but it shows Gasoline Alley, and you can clearly see how it's built to resemble the Calgary Public Market. And this is the Calgary Farmers Market's new structure in, I think it's called Greenbrier. There's a new neighborhood called Greenbrier, and Melcor Developments took this photograph of the new structure. It also was a design idea for the original concept for the Eau Claire market. And it's my understanding, I've been following the Twitter exchange between Alan Zackerson and a few others in town this past week. And it looks like this did influence the design of the Eau Claire market. Anyway, that's there's one important Jewish connection. Now we're looking at the street directly opposite. It's Fourth Avenue, but it's just the south side of the same block. So once again, when you drive into town, into downtown from Bridgeland, go over that flyover on the Reconciliation Bridge, you see the Calgary Drop-In Center, and just to the east of that is just a city parking lot, a Calgary Parking Authority parking lot where the Cecil Hotel used to be. Well, this is one of those blocks that was heavily Jewish. We see the bottom of the screen is the Fourth Avenue side. The Cecil Hotel is to the right. The Flower and Feed store that you see to the bottom left is where the drop-in center is. Now, what I've done in each case is outlined in blue the sites on the block that have Jewish connections. So once again, this isn't to say that they were of a long duration, that if this was a site associated with Jews, that it was exclusively Jewish through the decades. They weren't. This was a mixed neighborhood of Anglo-Saxons, Italians. There's even a Sikh name, someone named Singh, Japanese, Chinese. This is proximal to Chinatown. There's a lot of Chinese. But there are a lot of Jews and Slavic names as well, but many, many Jews in this part of town. So we'll get started on these sites. Here we have 421. So this is about the middle of the block between where the Cecil Hotel was and where the drop-in center is now. A stonemason was the original occupant, so we have a tie-in probably to the sandstone era of Calgary. But the Jews start coming in a little bit before the First World War. And here we have Benjamin Margulis. I don't have a photograph of him, but he was a secondhand dealer who lived on that block. Later on, he'd moved to Calgary around 1908. Later in his business career, he moved into he had a confectionery store in the former Hull's Opera House. This is Center Street and 6th Avenue. Some of you will recognize this photograph of the former Hull's Opera House that was later converted just into apartments and shops. And he had a business there, not far from where he lived, although he had already moved by that time. Died at 56, so didn't live very long. And a later occupant of the same house is Harry Carnett. He moved here. He was a homesteader before he moved into Calgary, a merchant, I believe. Now, the name becomes known in the next generation when Morris Carnett, his son, becomes a psychiatrist, and I believe the first professional psychiatrist in Calgary, or one of the first. And it was through his efforts that the Calgary General Hospital established its psychiatric wing eventually. So from humble beginnings on 4th Avenue Southeast. I also indicate in white some of the names of the non-Jewish residents of the same structures. And you can see once again, that there are many occupants of, I mean, the Jewish connections to these sites aren't always always consistent or long lasting. And ultimately for this dwelling, we have condemned for human occupancy 1956. Got that from a city document. Now we're over to 415. We're inching along the block. Harry Berkeson, a clothing merchant, lived on this site. And then Sam Martin, who owned Martin's Bakery, a landmark Calgary business, Jewish-owned Calgary business in Calgary that was famous for its breads. My mother remarks on the pumpernickel bread that she so loved. Sam Martin would have his grandchildren on his knee helping him make bagels. Once again, a long-time business known throughout the city and centered on 4th Avenue Southeast. Now 411 just down the street, just another example. M. Shorsky, identified because of a Jewish sounding name, but I know nothing of him. This is the house where we have Sing Rum in 1927. So it sounds like a Sikh name. So there's really scope for further study if no one has done it already on the ethnic mix and ethnic change over time in this neighborhood. We're over to 407, getting closer to the Cecil Hotel. Here we have Sam Shannon, ultimately the owner of the Calgary Public Market, who had been a egg and poultry merchant at that market for many years. Here is a beautiful photograph that comes from the Jewish Historical Society, showing him with his daughter Martha in 1925. We move over to 405 4th Avenue Southeast. Now, this is the later site of the Cecil Cafe, where there was a Chinese-Canadian couple who owned and operated a cafe adjacent to the Cecil Hotel and shared the business name for many years. I'm talking about the building before that. Samuel Martin, once again, the owner of the bakery. He came from Romania in 1911, married Ida Spivak, opened his bakery, and the family lived over the bakery for about 20 years before about 20 years before they built a house adjacent to it. And he also did cantorial service, the chanting of the prayers and songs at the House of Jacob, which was Calgary's first and only synagogue for many years. Now we're over to the corner to the Cecil Hotel. It's built in 1911. It was a non-Jewish partnership that built it, and it opened in 1911. I'll get to the larger version. Oh, and you can see the bakery over to the left in this photograph that I got from the Provincial Archives. This hotel opened in 1911. It was demolished something like 6-7 years ago. And anyway, it was, a point of pride for its owners early on. It had a house orchestra, and then in the 1960s, it was the hangout for lesbian baseball players. They would go there after their games, and it was their place, their social place. So it's had quite a range of social history to it. In recent years, before its closure, it was often in the news for negative reasons, crime and social problems. But what I want to talk about is, for many years, it was owned by Leo Silberman, and after Leo's death, by Sam Silberman. So Leo owned it for many years. I went to meet him once. I was introduced by a friend, and I did an interview with him. He was a Holocaust survivor. And what he brought to the interview in the bar, he had a document that he'd received from the West German government offering him a pension, as compensation for having been in the Holocaust in a camp, and he declined. He declined to access that fund. He said they cannot make it up to me for what they did. And it was interesting. He was just rolling up the document and tapping it, like not being using the kind of care that one might want to use for an archival document. But it was so interesting to talk to him. Anyway, and then his son Leo, or his son Sam, ran the hotel for many years. The city eventually expropriated it and demolished it, and it's just a parking lot now. The other site that I want to show you here is just around the corner, and it's a 3rd Street address. And it's just a personal indulgence. You can see the blue outline there, but that's where my dad's cousin, Joe Sales, lived. Now, if anyone remembers Frenchie's, a sporting goods store, it was ultimately called Frenchie's in Baratos. It was it was the first thing you would see going east from downtown into Inglewood. It was in the Dick block or McGill block. And anyway, Frenchie was a war buddy of my dad's cousin, Joe. And so Joe and Frenchie and Joe's dad, Max Srolovitz, my great uncle, and namesake, my middle name is Max, opened Frenchie's, but they weren't going to call it Srolovitz's, so it was called Frenchie's. Frenchie's rolls off the tongue better than Srolovitz's. Anyway, and you'll hear a little bit more about my family too. I mean, anyone in the Jewish community who was going to give this talk would talk about their own family, so you'll forgive me. Now we're into the 300 East block, north side. We're into the downtown East Village here. It's on the west end, it's just an in-park parking lot, and on the east side, it's a condo tower. And let's see, I'm showing you the Jewish connections here. This is once again a 3rd Street Southeast address. It's just around the corner and highlighted in blue. This is the home of Rabbi Isaac Klegman, who was an early rabbi for the House of Jacob Synagogue. I've also highlighted the synagogue and how near it was, so you can see why this was such a Jewish area. It's so proximal to the synagogue, Jewish synagogue. The fire insurance map indicates in 1911, I suppose, to distinguish it from a Samaritan synagogue. Anyway, so Rabbi Klegman lived there, right where this condo tower is now. And then here I have a later photograph. This is taken sometime after 1947. It's probably in the 50s or 60s, this photograph. It's Martin's Bakery. This is a later iteration of Martin's Bakery, a purpose-built structure at the northwest corner of 4th Avenue and 3rd Street Southeast. That was there. I'm not sure when it was demolished. A little closer version of it from the city archives. And this is what's there now. It's a condo tower called Riverfront Point. It opened 11 years ago, and it takes the spot. Now I can give you a Jewish connection though. Right on the site, right on the corner, is the offices of Guardian Law, and one of the lawyers, my brother was her mother's paperboy in the 70s. So there's your Jewish connection. It doesn't take much to connect the dots when you're talking about Jewish geography. Here we're back around the corner at 334 4th Avenue Southeast. I show you where in the blue square. Samuel Shine, probably Samuel Shine, and lived at this address. I mean, we see how people moved around in rental homes. Isaac Tucker, another Jewish person in town, lived at this house between 1937 and 36. Anyway, in the 30s. And then we go next door. It's the Martin building, which the Martin family had built. You can see the bakery to the right. This is just a revenue property that they've got to the left. And once again, it's just, it's been demolished, and it's where that condo tower is now, right there. Now we keep moving further east. We just have more and more Jewish people. I love this guy's name, Meyer Breyer. That's all I know about him. And then at some point in this block, the sites cease to be where the condo tower is, and we see where they are on this beautiful parking lot. Anyway, we're just east of the in an in-park lot just east of the Harry Hayes building, the federal building, which was built in the late 70s. In-park lot number 185. And we'll look at some of the houses that were there. Hirsch Sosinski. Oh, this is our former president of the Jewish Historical Society, Betty Sherwood. This is her mishpacha. It's her family. Her grandfather was Hirsch Sosinski, who had come from Russia by way of Owen Sound, Ontario. Answered an ad from the Jewish community in 1905 looking for a ritual slaughterer to prepare kosher meat and to be the cantor for the singer for services. He also became the mohel, which is the circumciser of boys. Anyway, so he did a lot of work and for not a lot of money. And after 5 years, he quit. He had married a woman, Etta Sayer, from the Hirsch colony at Oxbow, Saskatchewan, one of the Jewish bloc settlements. Started a family, and so he opened a grocery store. And we have the family here. There's his wife and daughter right in front of the store. So we're looking east on 4th Avenue. You can see the Cecil Hotel over on the right-hand side. And they had that store for many, many years, something like 30 years at 328 4th Avenue. Oh, until his death in 1957. Ruth Sherwood, his daughter. And here we're moved a little bit further east. The brother of the baker, Morris Martin, lived in this house, and he in 1955 he got one of those Golden Jubilee Awards from Premier Ernest Manning that was presented to Albertans who had lived here since before 1905, and it was presented, signed by Premier Manning, presented to Hebrew Morris Martin. And I remember meeting his daughter many years ago, and she was just smiling, thinking about that. Hebrew Morris Martin, and the Jewish Historical Society has that certificate. We go to the next house over, 322, and it's Isaac Churgan, a men's clothier, but his fame as a clothier is eclipsed by his sons, Arnold Churgan, who founded the namesake shoe store, Arnold Churgan Shoes. And I went to Hebrew school with Craig Churgan, Arnold's son. He was a grade behind me. The same house where Isaac Churgan lived, a few other Jewish people lived there, but I also wanted to point out, now I didn't ask my wife how I would pronounce this Japanese name, but Shigejiro Inoue, who was one of 5 partners. There were 5 families who were partners in the Nippon silk business, which was on Stephen Avenue. It became a Western Canadian chain ultimately. And during the Second World War, when Canada was at war against the Empire of Japan, they had to change the name. So they called it Silkolina or Silkolina. And that's how many people remember it. So I don't know if Mr. Inoue is in this photograph, but he lived on 4th Avenue Southeast. The hotel next door, I do not know to have ever had Jewish connection, but I can't resist a hotel. It was the Lincoln Lodge. For many years, it was the Park, and then the Milton. I remember it as a kid when it was the Success Hotel. There was this little hotel called the Success Hotel on 4th Avenue Southeast. Now we get to Abe Bushakin, who lived a little further west on this block. He established Alberta News, which became a very important newspaper and magazine distribution business. He also married into the prominent Shumiatra family. So was a well-known part of a well-known family here in Calgary. We'll get back into him a little bit. Oh, here's his photograph. And he at one time worked for the Boston Hat Works, which was owned by one of his in-laws, Harry Shumiatra, who became Harry Smith, and that Boston Hat Works became Harry's News, which was a long-time business that so many people know. So here we have Abraham Bushakin, who lived in several of these houses that we're going to talk about. Louis Jacobson, who might or might not have been Jewish. We're not sure. It's not necessarily a Jewish name. But right on the corner is Rabbi Simon Smolensky, who he came in 1917 to succeed Rabbi Klegman as the rabbi at the House of Jacob. And he was here for decades and stayed. His family is here. So there are people alive who remember Rabbi Shimon Smolensky. He married many people in Calgary. It's interesting. His house later became a Hungarian church. And here we have a great photograph of Rabbi Shimon Smolensky. Anyway, then once again, all those houses are now part of the in-park parking lot. Now we go to the south side of the block. That entire block was demolished in about 1969 or 1970 to build the new Calgary YWCA, which is now the old Calgary YWCA, and it's closed up and it looks pretty derelict. I took this photograph yesterday. So we look at what was on the block, and you can see this is the block. See, here's the block with 4th Avenue at the bottom, but then we look towards the top of the image, you see how proximal this is to the synagogue. So you can understand why there is such a great concentration on this block of Jewish connections. It's just about every building on this block. And we'll have to go through them quickly. I haven't left myself much time. Sibley's Hall at 333. This is a wedding invitation for the marriage of Sarah Susinski and Mr. B. Margulis, who were married at Sibley's Hall, 333 5th Avenue. This later becomes Hector Ironworks, a business owned by John Hector, who'd survived a pogrom in Odessa, came here in 1906. And I believe he's the Tor in Ribtor. Ribtor Hardware, which so many of us know, was a portmanteau of the names Reback and Hector. So Hector is the Tor in Ribtor. We go next door to 331. We see, just several, a dwelling with a lot of different Jewish names in it. The one next door to that, though, 327, 4th Avenue Southeast, once again, right where the YWCA is now, was the Calgary Hebrew School in 1912. And for those who know Calgary history, Calgary was booming in 1912. We had a privately owned university that aspired to be the University of Calgary. It ultimately failed. But here we have the Calgary Herald talking about the Calgary Hebrew School and tying it into a larger city context and saying, now that we have a university, we know that colleges not only need Latin and Greek, but also Hebrew. So if this school is a success, we can have classes for Gentiles tied in with the university and be, a sophisticated place where non-Jewish people also learn Hebrew as part of their classical studies. Sorry, I've messed up a little bit. Anyway, it was only the Calgary Hebrew School briefly, and then it was the longtime home of many Jewish people, including David Geffen, but not the David Geffen who owns the record company and SKG Studios. Nathan Kaufman, another one. We're just going through the different houses on this block. Once again, they're just names at this point, some of them. Another home where Rabbi Klegman lived. Here he's nearer to his place of work, the synagogue. Then I'll go to the corner. We've got Abraham Berkovich. So once again, just pretty much a Jewish block where the north half of the YWCA was. Now we go to the 200 East block, north side. That is entire block is the Harry Hayes building, the federal building. Took a massive chunk out of Chinatown when it was built. So we'll look at the houses that were there. And here, this is a great photograph that Judy DeFoo sent me this morning. Judy DeFoo, her father, Paul DeFoo, he was born in Chinatown. He was a longtime merchant. His father, Louis DeFoo, was also a merchant and a pioneer and founder in the Chinese Canadian community. They lived for decades at 219 4th Avenue Southeast. So there's Paul at the right and his siblings standing in front of the house, but we see the north side of the block. So all of those houses that we see in the background are on the site of the Harry Hayes building, or the grounds of the Harry Hayes building. Now we look at once again, the Jewish connections of the block, just about every building on the site. So I won't go through every name, but Berkovich is one, Yampolsky is another. I'll just stop at the interesting bits. Milikovsky, Dvorkin, Elman, Berkovich, and now I'll stop. There's just too many. But here we get, this is 224. We have a literary reference. Benjamin Margulis again and Samuel Sheinin, names we've already encountered. But at one point, this is the home of the Mawhinney family. And the only other time I've ever heard the name Mawhinney is in The Plot Against America, the novel by Philip Roth, where Charles Lindbergh has become the president of the United States. He's beaten Franklin Roosevelt. He's an anti-Semite. He's an isolationist. He keeps America out of the war. And he establishes a program where young American Jews can be placed with rural families on farms to learn how to be real Americans. And the son in the family that's central to the story goes to stay with the Mawhinney family in the South. So there's two connections of that name for me, and they're both connected to Jews. Once again, just more Jewish families on the street. Here we have in the background the house at 220. Once again, this is the Dufours standing in front of their house, but what we have is the house across the street where Nathan Medden, whom I believe to be Jewish from his name, lived at one point. Morris Goldstein lived right next door, and I believe that part of that house is in the photograph. I'll skip ahead. Israel Pasternak lived at 212 for many years, decades. And his son, once again, we have a case where the son becomes more famous, David Pasternak, who worked with Carl Clark to develop the science of the oil sands extraction and processing. So he's not as famous as Carl Clark in Alberta petroleum history, but very well known. And this is right up from his death in the 1970s in Edmonton, but he researched and wrote and published several papers with Carl Clark, so an important figure in Alberta's petroleum history. Here is a photograph of a beautiful house that looks just like the Adams family house. It's the Kinniston house, but we're talking about the one next door. So Israel Pasternak also lived in that house that you see over to the right. but we just happened to have a little corner of Israel Pasternak's house because the photographer was getting the Kinniston house. Kinniston, can't remember his first name, but he was a merchant in 1890s Calgary. This was a favorite style when the house was built, but now you associate it with the Addams family or with the haunted house thrill rides at the Stampede and Conklin shows and things like that. This is a city archives photograph. There was a couple of university students who tried in the 70s to save this house unsuccessfully. Anyway, there is a Jewish connection. Meyer Potter, who sold teas and coffee in his shop nearby, lived in this what appears to us to be a haunted house. So nice to have a Jewish connection there. Now, Meyer Potter was a manufacturing confectioner, and I don't have a photograph of him, but the Jewish Historical Society sent me a photograph of his mentor, who's Israel Kesnick. If anyone knows that strip of shops in the Beltline on 11th Street Southwest, the one that where the Galaxy Diner was and the Kalamata Grocery. One of the vacant ones was the confectionery and chocolate shop of Israel Kesnick, where he made chocolates there. Looks like a great guy to buy chocolates from. So once again, Meyer Potter's house. Now we're over to the south side of the block, and what do we have there? This is public housing that was constructed in the 1970s, and in the background, the Delta Bow Valley Inn. So that's this entire block, Baker House, Delta Bow Valley Inn. So we look at the Jewish connections. There are about half of the block is Jewish connections. The Weiss Grocery on the corner. We have Harry Hashman, whom I believe to be the father of the Sam Hashman, who had the big construction business in one of these houses, two of these houses, as it turns out. We'll keep going. A few Jewish names here. These are unknown visitors to the Defoe house. So this is I've never found any Jewish connection to the Defoe house, but Jews all around. And once again, Louis Defoe was a pioneer of the Chinese Canadian community, and this house is at the edge of Chinatown. Here we have Louis Defoe and his wife Eng Ho. And Judy Defoe sent me these photographs just this morning. So they were there for many decades. They saw Jews come and go. And here they are in the backyard, I believe. And you see the next house over at 215, the Bloomfield house, but these were non-Jewish Bloomfields that lived there for many years. Bloomfield had an ice cream shop on 8th Avenue. Then we get over to the corner where Noah Polsky or Noah Yampolsky had a shop, and that's right where the Delta Bow Valley Inn is now. We go now to the 100 East block, north side, and what we have there is First Street Plaza. It's just an office block that sort of has it's just bare concrete, but it sort of has a Chinese motif to it. And then further west on the block, the balance of the block, is the Dragon City Mall, which Sam Switzer or Ushu Switzer had converted an existing building into this mall. So here we have a large Chinese mall in Chinatown, and it's developed by a Jewish owner. Now, what was on this block? We have a few Jewish connections here. Look at the top left, the northeast corner of, I think it's First Street Southeast and 4th Avenue. It's the Cloverleaf Cheese Company, which Jack Bergman started in the late 1930s or early 1940s. A photograph of the Cloverleaf Cheese Company building at the bottom. That's where First Street Plaza is now. Then we go a little further down the block to 116. We have Isaac Hashman. 114, more Jewish families. 112, Harry Hashman. Once again, I think this is the construction family. Many non-Jewish residents as well, but there's one who was very famous in this house, in this photograph that I got from the Provincial Archives. It's Bob Edwards, the publisher of the Calgary Eye Opener, who was an important figure, social commenter, editor, and ultimately a politician in Calgary. He died sadly in 1921 at not an advanced age. He hadn't long been married. His wife outlived him, and she lived in the house for a few more years. And I happened to know that he had a Jewish assistant, so I got another Jewish connection to that house. Can't remember her name, Bertha something. Here's the tennis court on the corner where they later built a garage. Now we're at the south side, so this is directly opposite. On the corner is the former AGT Tower. It's now called First Tower. there's a Bank of Montreal there. And to the east of that is another in-park lot. And if anyone remembers Video and Sound, it was a video store at the edge of Chinatown. And there was a Chinese-Canadian guy that worked there, and he'd seen every movie. He could tell you every movie there ever was and whether it's good or bad. And they had just about every movie there. I mean, it seemed that way anyway. It's been gone for 20, 25 years probably. Anyway, here are the Jewish connections. There are 4 on that block. And we'll just whip through a few of them, just names. Once again, Hebrew Morris Martin. Here we have the Linton home. James C. Linton was a bookseller in Calgary for 50 years. He was on city council, important figure in early Calgary. I happen to know that he donated to a Jewish cause. It was, I think, during the First World War or before. It was like for relief of Russian Jews who were being persecuted. He lived in that house for many years, but no direct Jewish connection to the house, but an important family. Then next to that, we have Abe Hapton right on the corner there. And I just have to read you a couple of things from Abe Hapton's autobiography, which were sent to me from the Jewish Historical Society. He'd come from Gomel. Let's see, he comes here he knew Abraham Shumiacher in Gomel. In the Russian Empire. Abe Shumiacher comes here. It's a relative of his who creates the white cowboy hat, the Smith-built hat. Anyway, he comes here in the spring of 1912. He says, we were 60 miles from the Titanic when it was hit. I got to Calgary. He's looking for the Smiths, whom he knew. I asked a Jewish-looking man with a horse and dray if he knew them, and he drove me to the Smiths for 50 cents. They lived on 10th Avenue, and I stayed with them for 2 weeks. They gave me a dose of Epsom salts to get me in shape. So that's his rival story. Now we get to the corner. This distinguished-looking man is Adoniram Judson Sammis. He was a city commissioner for many years. There he is standing in front of City Hall, a distinguished figure. Sammis Road in Crescent Heights is named for him, but if not in the same house, then certainly on the same site was my family, Max Sralowitz. And this is a case of the shoemaker's children. I didn't have time to find a photograph of my great uncle, but I can tell you he was a merchant, and he was robbed once. A person with the threat of violence was going to, demanded money out of the till. So my great uncle beat him up. He was in his 70s or something. My great uncle beat him up, held him until the police got there. Anyway, we go to the 100 West Block, north side. What's there now? It's Sun Life Plaza, although they have changed it to the ampersand. And there you see an ampersand on the street, signaling the new name of the complex. One Jewish connection here, although there are a couple of other interesting buildings on the block I'd like to talk to you about. 106 4th Avenue Southwest, we're in the Southwest now. Harry Arkin lived there for a while, and then anyway, his family lived there for several years. But then after that, we get to Meyer Nagler. This is, if anyone remembers Nagler's department store, that's the family. Nagler's department store, I understand, was third after the Hudson's Bay and Eaton's. The next biggest and most notable department store was locally owned, and it was Nagler's. So here we have Meyer Nagler and his family. They lived at 106. This is the northwest corner of Center Street and 8th Avenue Southeast. Their daughter attended normal school, taught out in the country, and eventually taught in Calgary. Anyway, Meyer Nagler was a grocer at the City Hall Market, which stood where Olympic Plaza is now, before his family established the department store. So great photograph. I don't know if this is the house on 4th Avenue or if it's one they got it and they moved into after that. Now we'll just keep going down the block, because there's a couple of interesting buildings. The Coca-Cola factory, and I haven't found any Jewish connection, but it's interesting to know that there was a Coca-Cola factory that looked this beautiful on 4th Avenue Southwest. And we get to, I don't have a photograph of it. There was the Calgary Women's Hostel. So that's nice to know that there was such an institution for women in need who would have a place to go and know that they were in a safe place. Now we're on the south side of the block, west of Center Street, and it's the site of what was known as James Short Park, and which surmounted the James Short Parkade. This has become very controversial, and the name has been dropped, and the city is in a process now of selecting a new name. James Short, who was the principal of the first Protestant school in Calgary, he wasn't the first principal, and later became a school board trustee and the chair of the school board, as well as Calgary's Crown Prosecutor, became the namesake of the school. But he actively resisted the establishment of Chinatown when it was being created in 1911. And he said hurtful things in opposition to the establishment of Chinatown. And notwithstanding that, the city named the park and parkade for him 30 years ago. So this is now being addressed. So there's a process now to seek a new name. I mentioned this because it's there, and because in addition to the many, many Chinese Canadian students who attended, as well as those of other ethnicities, although it ultimately became basically a Chinese Canadian school, there were early on many Jewish students who went there. Central Public School was its original name. It was renamed James Short in 1938. And I think any of our Jewish participants tonight will, if their family was here back at that time, they will have had family who attended that school. In fact, the Hebrew school, the Calgary Hebrew School, it was an after-school program until the 1950s. Cheder is what we call it in Yiddish. It's a word derived from Hebrew. It means a room or a classroom. And so pupils would go to public school, and many Jewish students went to this school. But then afterward, they would go to Cheder. They'd go to the Hebrew school. And it was housed for several months in this building in 1919. I've read through the minutes of the Calgary School Board, as the CBE was called then. So it came to the board, that there was a request from the Hebrew community to have the use of a classroom in the evening for the teaching of Hebrew, and the permission was granted so long as care was taken, of the school property, and that there wasn't any added burden for the caretaker of the school. Several months later, in the autumn of 1919, there's another minute that says, despite repeated requests, the Hebrew parents have been unable to control their children, who have thrown books and overturned desks and left garbage, and it's been an annoyance to the caretaker, and now the permission is withdrawn. And then we know from local Jewish history that the community bought a sandstone house on 5th Avenue, or 6th Avenue rather, in the winter of 1919-1920 for use as the school and as a social hall. It became the Talmud Torah Hall. So we have a little backstory that it was immediately prior to that, the Jewish students revealed themselves to be as students are in any generation. So these grandparents or great-grandparents of today's Hebrew school students have no leg to stand on if they talk about discipline and the decline of decorum at school. Anyway, there's more Jewish connection to this building as well. We have on the far right, there's Carl Safran, who went on to become, he was the founder of special education in Calgary. He was the superintendent of the public school board, and he was a pupil at Central School. And here he's reminiscing for a centennial history book in 1975 on education history in Calgary. And he relates to the author. He's referring to the 1920s or earlier. We had a real conglomeration of ethnic groups: Chinese, Jewish, German, Russian. There was very little prejudice because most of us came from minority groups. The Chinese and Jewish youngsters always did very well and usually headed the class. Now here's an oblique aerial showing that block. If you look on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, you see we're looking from the 4th Avenue side towards James Short School. You see the cupola facing 5th Avenue, and that's the only surviving portion of the school. When they demolished it in 1969, they saved the cupola. Now you can see that the block extends further to the left, that is further east than the schoolyard. The small building fronting 4th Avenue there it was built as Central Bungalow School. It became James Short Bungalow School. It was demolished sometime in the 60s as well. But the eastern portion of the block is privately owned. You see a bunch of cars parked there. It originally was houses. And when Fort Calgary was demolished, the barracks were moved into an old Presbyterian manse on that block. It later became mostly commercial. Anyway, that now the eastern half of the block is where the park and parkade is that were named for James Short, and now we're going to have a new name. Now, the cupola, so you can see how the cupola came from the western side of the block where the TransCanada Tower or the TC Energy Tower is now. The eastern side of the block isn't where the school was, but it is where part of the schoolyard was. But the cupola is now way off in the corner, just outside of the frame on the left, on what was once private property. And there it is at the corner of 5th Avenue and Center Street, northwest corner, on a lot that my great aunt owned, Golda Srolovitz. She was the wife of Max Srolovitz, from whom I got my middle name. And they were both my blood relatives. My grandfather and my grandmother were the brother and sister of my great uncle and my great aunt. Everybody's got that in their family too. Anyway, we're looking west from the park towards the TC Energy Tower, which is where the school had been. Now we're almost finished. We're in the home stretch. We're going to make 8 o'clock. We're on the 200 West block, north side. And the Jewish connections are getting a little slim here because it was mostly on 4th Avenue East that the Jewish connections were. Here we see the, now here we have this beautiful colorized postcard showing the west end of the block. The house just to the right of the center is going to look pretty familiar to anyone who has been to Heritage Park and seen it there as the Prince House. It was at 238 4th Avenue Southwest, right at the corner, northeast corner of 4th Avenue and 1st Street Southwest. There's an office tower there now, but what we see on this block is the Prince House is just to the left of the frame that we see here, but we see 2 hotels with Jewish connections. The one to the right is I'm unaware of any Jewish connection to the site previously, but Sam Switzer, once again, Usher Switzer, who developed the Dragon City Mall in the 1960s, had built the Summit Hotel, which ultimately became the Sheraton Summit, a landmark skyscraper in Calgary of its day. A hotel that's remembered by so many. Once I went on a studio tour of the CTV Calgary studio, which at that time was CFAC, and they had a skyline panorama behind the news desk that you'd see on the news every night. And at the time of my tour, this hotel had long been demolished, and yet there it was in the panoramic photographs. So viewers didn't know how outdated the picture was. Anyway, a Jewish-owned hotel, the Sheraton Summit, and the one in the middle of the block, the International, which is still there. There were Jewish owners when it first opened. I don't know if there have been since. And here's what's left of the site of the Summit. It's an in-park lot. You see the International Hotel in the background, which used to be, it absolutely stood out as a skyscraper. Now you can barely see it. There's so many tall buildings in Calgary. Now we look on the south side of the block, a couple of Jewish connections. The entire block is the back end of 5th Avenue Place, which used to be Esso Plaza. So many of us used to go there for movies when it was the Cineplex. There were small screens, and you could go see cheap movies there. Anyway, so this is the 4th Avenue side of 5th Avenue Place. Here's the fire insurance map. Braemar Lodge was the big landmark on that building. Here I've outlined the two sites with Jewish connections on this block, and this is our last block, so I'm almost done. Now 203 4th Avenue Southwest. This is the southwest corner of 1st Street Southwest and 4th Avenue. Beautiful house built in 1889 for Daniel Webster Marsh, who was a merchant on 8th Avenue and who became mayor of Calgary for one term in the late 19th century. The house was ultimately cut up into suites, and that's when Harry Goffsky lived there in suite number 3 in the early 1940s. The house was demolished a decade later. Here we have another photograph of this beautiful mansion that's ultimately cut up into apartments and then demolished. And here we have one of 2 Harry Goffskys. This might be our Harry Goffsky who lived there. I'm hoping it is, because I don't have a picture of the other Harry Goffsky. Then we move west on the block to Braemar Lodge, which was built by the same Daniel Webster Marsh, who built his house on the corner. This he sold to the Anglican Church, and it became the official residence of the Anglican Bishop of Calgary, who was Cyprian Pinkham at the time, the namesake for Bishop Pinkham School. and it was called Bishop's Court. Then after he moved out and the church sold it, it became a dry hotel. It was a residential hotel owned by the Mrs. Mollison, Miss Mollison and her sister, Miss Mollison. And a real beautiful hotel, piano in the lobby. It was sold in 1934 to Ethel Diamond. And I'm reaching here because Ethel Diamond was not Jewish, but I believe that her husband, Samuel Diamond, was Jewish. So, and the way these things go, it doesn't take much to draw a Jewish connection, and we'll take them all. Anyway, that is my talk, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.
All right, so we have our first question here. How come the Jews did not rent the nice houses on 4th Avenue west of Center Street?
Yes, and honestly, I don't know. I mean, once again, I didn't. This is an anecdotal history rather than a solid piece of analysis. But yeah, I mean, there were some Jews in nicer places west of Center Street or west of First Street Southwest, but very few and mostly later. So, I mean, honestly, I think, I just think it's proximity to the synagogue in a cheaper immigrant kind of area. I mean, in any North American city, the East End is less prestigious and less pricey than the West. There were Jews who had money. And we see some of them, the odd one in what we were talking about tonight. I can't remember the family, but they start out on 4th Avenue Southeast and end up on Colborne Crescent in Mount Royal. So I think you'd probably see some of these families ending up in nicer parts of town. It's a starter community for Jewish immigrants and other immigrants. That's my guess. But I mean, I know my audience and they're engaged. So I know that there are things that other participants know that I do not. I don't
Definitely. I knew nothing about this, and I walk through that area all the time on my way to the Central Library for work. So I'm definitely going to appreciate it next time when I have to do the walk. Laura says Shuttler's Grocery, and my grandparents also lived on 4th Avenue East.
I'll have to speak to you, Laura.
Someone says one of the houses was owned by Hyman Dworkin.
Oh, Dworkin, yes.
Who was their grandfather.
And I'm going to have to contact that person. I don't see who it is, but there are Dworkins and Dworkins in Calgary. I know the difference. And once again, this was a start. So I'll be doing outreach, and I hope that whoever, has something to offer will contact the Jewish Historical Society and, contribute that information to the society's knowledge and to the further development of this talk.
Perfect.
I'm just learning myself.
Yeah. So Dee asks, why was Samus Road across from the river named for him?
And I have a book that, the library has the book too, but let me just grab it and I'll be able to tell you. I mean, he was prominent. He was a city commissioner. I'm just going to grab it. It's What's in a Name Calgary by Donna Mae Humber. And here's an easy answer that I don't even have to know. I just have to be able to read. Samus Road. Hold on, it's that beautiful one. It's a steep one. If you're going north on the Center Street Bridge and taking a sharp right immediately after north of the bridge, it's that steep road up into Crescent Heights with a beautiful view if you crane your neck to the right.
Yes, I know that road well.
Yeah. Rode my electric scooter up it.
I walk my dogs down it. Gear. That's a steep road to be riding an electric scooter on.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't ride down it, but I rode up it. It does not tell us. It just tells us who Adoniram Judson Samus was. Doesn't explain why the street's named for him. Somebody's got to know, and I'll I can promise to find out and notify the local history room at the library for the person who asked.
Perfect. All right. Elizabeth asked, do you have any information about 225-4th Avenue Southwest. Martian's stepdaughter, Tanis Allison, lived there in 1909.
Oh boy. So the address 225 4th Avenue Southwest.
Yes.
Well, I happen to have a couple of Henderson's directories handy. So why don't I look? I'll just have a sample year of 1948 and tell you, is it 225 4th Avenue Southwest in 1948, if it'll help. It's as simple as, you know what I mean? The Hendersons, which are online and keyword searchable between 1910 and the early 1950s, is an excellent resource for this. 4th Avenue Southwest. And another great source is now that the pandemic is sort of lightening up and the city archives is taking research appointments, you can do search in the tax rolls, which in the early years gives you both owners and excuse me, and tenancies as well. 4th Avenue Southwest 225 in 1948. It's apartments. Alex R. Laidlaw, Frank D. Scott, and E. Thomas Gravely lived there at that time. And if I was to flip through, I looked up in the section that tells us who lives there by address. But if I was to take those three names and look them up alphabetically, it'll tell me who they're married to and what line of business they're in and who they work for or which company they own. And if they have a telephone.
Amazing.
If they're renting or if they own. In certain years anyway. So you think, you know, the past is gone, but the records are such that you can quickly do outline history of occupancy or ownership of a building or site in the city.
Amazing. You're helping us all become a little bit more, I guess, historians, being able to go out and do our own research. So Mar asks, what can you tell us about the Jewish-owned Arlington Hotel?
I hadn't known it was Jewish owned. Boy, it doubled as a Methodist church at one time. I'm trying to think of the address. It was something like 5th Avenue Southwest, built before the First World War. And honestly, I had the knowledge, and it doesn't come immediately to mind. But is there, Catherine? Is there any kind of follow-up process for chat questions?
If you would like, we could share your email, and they can email you.
Yeah. Happy to do that.
Yeah, definitely. We
I
can.
was about to give my phone number. It's harry.sanders@shaw.ca.
All right, harry.sanders@shaw.ca.
Yeah, and Sanders, incidentally, is an assumed name. My father changed it from Srolovitz in the 50s to pass. He followed the lead of his great uncle, Ralph Srolovitz, who changed his name to Ralph Sanders, and a past president of our society, Jack Switzer, found an item in the newspaper for me where my great uncle, Ralph Srolovitz, had come before Magistrate Sanders, Colonel Sanders. He was charged with loitering with his dray wagon on 9th Avenue, and he was fined $1. And he's the first in our family to adopt the name Sanders. So
amazing.
I am named for a great uncle who named himself for Colonel Sanders.
That's very cool. It's very interesting to learn, especially with where people come from, where their last names come from. My last name is Russian, but when my family immigrated to Canada, no one could speak English. And so the people who write down the names messed it up a lot. So our next...
So many. Yeah.
Yeah, it was supposed to be like Yushkin, but everyone says Yukin, but Yukin is what we're aiming for. So Marianne asked, did anyone at least try to save/preserve the beautiful houses along 4th Avenue? What year were they torn down? And then they said, I find it sad that they were demolished.
Right. And I haven't followed through on that on the demolition date. It just wasn't able to get the time to follow through, except for a couple where I know, where that beautiful one, D.W. Marsh's mansion, was demolished in 1953. And I happen to know that the Kinniston house, the one that looked like the Adams family house, was demolished, scheduled for demolition by 1974, and certainly demolished. I mean, it took out a whole block in the early to mid 1970s to build the Harry Hayes building. So we know when a whole block went. Apart of other than that, I mean, the sources are, when they vanish from Henderson's is one way to go. Another is the city archives has assessment history cards on these buildings. I mean, many of the participants are going to know these things, and I'm not telling them anything they don't know. But for those who don't, you can look them up by legal description. It's a card filled out in the 30s or 40s that tells you the physical description, estimated age of a house, and then subsequent to the creation of the card, it tells you any follow-up. If there's been alterations, they're noted. If there's been a revision to the assessment, that's noted. And if it's been demolished or moved, which sometimes houses were moved, and I think it happened in a couple of cases here, the date is noted. So there are sources. I can't speak to the question other than my knowledge that one block was demolished in the 70s and one house I know of was demolished in the 50s. Oh, and Braemar Lodge, that beautiful residential hotel, burned in 1965 while it was under, it was going to be demolished. It's just it burned before it was demolished. But apart from that, I can say there is a way to find out. Even though I confess ignorance, I don't know. I also see that Mel Kaczynski knew my great uncle Morris Throlovitz.
Jackie says, what is the Singer's family who eventually moved to Colmburn Ave?
The Singer family. Is this? I can't remember if I mentioned the Singer family. I don't remember it. I mean, I know we all know of a Singer family, which is Jack Singer. And I don't know if that's the family you're referring to, the namesake for the Jack Singer Concert Hall. If that's the family you're referencing, all I know is I can just tell you, I interviewed Jack Singer once many years ago by telephone. If anyone remembers the Crown building, which they demolished, it was on First Street Southeast. They demolished it to make way for the TELUS Convention Center. It was a 3-story commercial and office building, I think. Anyway, there was a big painted sign on the north end of it for Perky's Pet Food. And it was a big painted can of pet food. And the slogan said, "Give your dog and cat a treat. Get them Perkies, good to eat." And there is a photograph of it, and everybody remembers that sign. And I asked Jack Singer about it, and he said, yeah, his family owned the Perky and Red Top dog food companies, which operated in Nose Creek, basically where Deerfoot Trail and the TELUS Spark Science Museum are. So that's what I can tell you about the Singer family, but I don't know if it's the same one.
I don't know either.
But the Jewish Historical Society will know, and the family.
Oh,
yeah.
Perfect. So Elizabeth asks, this is a follow-up question to the address that you looked at. They asked, was the house number changed? I don't have records of 233 4th Avenue Southwest. So Elizabeth, could you clarify which address you're looking for? Because the first address you asked about was 225 4th Avenue.
Yeah, this is the block where 225, I think 225, oh wait, is 225, that might be, I'm on full screen here. Oh wait, 225, I think was the now that I think of it, 215 was the Braemar Lodge, that residential hotel. There was another house at 225, that's right. So when I read that it was apartments, that must have been one of those older houses. And I believe there is a photograph of it. I included a photograph initially in my slideshow, but then in my limited research, I didn't find a Jewish connection, so I took it out. And I happen to know that the two houses west of Braemar Lodge Residential Hotel were eventually demolished, and Calgary Motor Products was put in there. And I had a picture of Calgary Motor Products, but I was trying to find out if there was a Jewish connection. I know there were some Jewish families who were owned car sales businesses, automobile sales businesses in Calgary, and I was trying to find out if Calgary Motor Products. So certainly, I'm quite certain that the house at 225 4th Avenue Southwest and the house at 233, if there were both, were demolished to make way for Calgary Motor Products. Actually, I'll just put up those slides. I can do that. I just moved them to the end of my presentation and didn't plan to use them. Here. No, I think it's going to take me too long. But yes, certainly I believe there were houses at those addresses. Maybe I have it.
Yeah.
No,
well,
I'm afraid I don't. Yeah.
That's perfectly okay. We have another question from Zaritza. Why was the Sheraton Summit Hotel demolished? It seemed like such a wonderful landmark.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm sure there are. I mean, if someone from the a participant wants to share that on the chat, they might know. I know that Sydney Sharp, the journalist, did a biography of Sam Switzer, and I suspect it's in there. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason. I just don't know it. But Seeking the Summit, I think, is the title of Sydney Sharp's biography of Sam Switzer. It might be in there. But the other thing is, Catherine, you've given out my email address. I'm happy to field questions at my email address. Yeah.
Perfect.
I mean, I'm sure the structure was fine, probably.
Well, Melvin just wrote in the track that the summit ran into structural problems and it also lack of business.
Then I was unsure about what I said. I was sure of that the structure was fine. Thank you, Mel. I also see that Mel bought his first bicycle from my great uncle.
Yes. There's so many just interesting comments in the chat right now.
One thing I will mention too is a lot of the research I did was pre-1950, so it's going to be out. You know what I mean? I'm sure there was a lot of subsequent Jewish association with 4th Avenue that I missed. I just, the time constraints of developing a talk in one's spare time.
No, definitely. Yeah, well, with the chickens, that's making me think of how the bylaws, you can have some chickens again. Which is very exciting. Have some chickens running around the city.
There's this great story I interviewed many years ago. I interviewed Peter Fitzgerald Moore, who was a geologist in town, who had come from England. And for 2 years in the 50s, he was the mayor of Bowness. And I interviewed him about his experiences being the mayor of Bowness. And early on in his tenure, there was a petition came around. Petitioners wanted to be able to raise chickens in Bowness, so he was prepared to act on the petition. And the town clerk told him, "Well, no, wait. You have to wait for the other petition." And he said, "What other petition?" And she said, "Well, there's sure to be a petition of people who are against having chickens in Bowness." So sure enough, there was a counter petition, and then they put it to a plebiscite, and the voters voted down chicken raising in Bowness. And then I was able to put in my article I wrote on it, he said, "It's really too bad because Bowness is such a nice place to raise chickens."
Yeah, definitely.
So nice to think we can do it again.
Yeah, I would love to get some chickens, but I have a 90-pound dog who would also probably love to get the chickens.
Oh, yeah, you can't.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. We're almost at time here. So just on behalf of the Calgary Public Library, thank you so much. This was so informative, and it was wonderful getting to hear all your answers to these questions and all of our attendees' comments and personal connections to the space. So with that, I'm just going to invite Doug back for some closing remarks.
Harry, thank you so much. As always, interesting, enlightening, incredibly well researched. But I think the main reason that we all love your talks is that they so obviously come from your heart. This encyclopedic knowledge just overflowing like an artesian well, and your enthusiasm becomes our enthusiasm. Folks, please remember to check out our website at chinookhistory.ca for information regarding all Historic Week programs, Calgary Historic Week programs, virtual and in person. You will also find a listing of our valuable supporters, how to join our society, and how to support our programs. Thanks for joining us tonight.